Many millennia ago, at the peak of Mount Hermon in the Golan Heights, a group of divine beings known as the Watchers, or Sons of God, descended in an act of rebellion against their king, Yahweh. By teaching them the secret knowledge of the cosmos, they sought to wrestle dominion of the earth away from humanity. They bore children with them, and their offspring were both human and divine. These giants are the demigods of old, and the events that transpired would forever alter the course of human history. At Camp Hermon, we discuss the oddities of the ancient world and their lingering impact on our world today. Welcome.
Hey campers, welcome back to another exciting episode of Camp Hermon. I'm Chris Price, got my boy Mikey Stibbs in the booth, not literally, but figuratively, with me today. What's up, Mike?
Not a whole lot. Just been living the Fringe. That's all I can say. Been
Living
working
the Fringe.
Yeah, living the Fringe, bro.
I like that. So, Mike, you had mentioned before we started recording some news about something to do with the Mysteries of the LBL episode that we did recently. What's up with that?
Yeah, so we did the episode on Land Between the Lakes. Unfortunately, the YouTube version, for whatever reason, YouTube cut out Tori's complete rendering of the massacre that happened in 1982. And it was really weird. And I had went back into my recording and my thing there, and everything was set properly. I didn't have her channel muted. And I was gonna flip it out, but I didn't. For some reason, I didn't change it out. And I just, made sure that on the upload to Spotify, where most people are listening, that it was good to go. And it was. But yeah, that story of the massacre was pretty much one of the, I'd say, central stories, urban legends of the LBL. And Jason had mentioned how he had a friend that knew one of the guys that was involved. And I asked Jason, I was like, Jason, is his name Roger? And Jason was like, yes. And then I said to Jason, well, the video that he had that was explaining it and him being there is no longer available to view on YouTube. And I would love to talk with the guy. And I told Jason, hey, reach out to your friends, see if we can get him on. But before Jason could even do that, I had two different comments on YouTube from two different Rogers claiming to be that Roger. So I'm trying to figure out who is who, or let's just say at this point, who has the best story. But I do have, I am going to, Jason and I are going to try to vet the first one on Saturday to see if we can get his story. And then, maybe I can make a short story doc, like 10 minutes that you could show at the LBL conference when you go. So just an update on that. I thought it was pretty cool, but we never know, people they just want internet clout and they're not really who they say they are. So nonetheless, that was a great show. If you didn't listen to it, go back and listen to it, but we're going to have a great show tonight. So tell us about tonight, Chris.
Before I do, Mike, I just want to mention that there may still be tickets left to the Mysteries of the LBL conference. It's not going to be the early bird price anymore, but there may be some tickets left. So go to camphermon.com to check that out. Mike, on tonight's show, we have got Kyle and Ben from the Tinfoil Hat Club podcast, and we're going to be doing a Kyle deep dive into the Book of Jubilees, or, well, I don't know if we have time for a whole deep dive into the whole book, but maybe touching on some of the more, fringy portions of it, you'd say?
Yeah, it'll be enough to definitely whet your appetites to want to maybe pick this book up and dive in.
Awesome. All right. So Kyle, Ben, tell us just briefly about your podcast and kind of how you guys got started, what topics you guys like to discuss, and just a little bit about yourselves.
Yeah. You want to go first? You want me to go first?
You can go first.
All right. So yeah, we got started. Literally, we just celebrated our 1 year. So that was awesome.
Congrats.
Thanks, man. For those of you that don't know out there and your listeners and maybe not podcasters, it's to make it even past 20 episodes, you're already better than 99% of other people because most podcasts die before they ever get to that point. So the Lord's been good, man. He brought a lot of people in front of us to talk to. And the way I always describe it to guests and really to people when I'm talking to them is I just tell them that we cover all the fringe, conspiratorial and biblical things the church doesn't like to talk about. So that kind of covers a nice swath of territory. So could be things like UFOs and aliens, but for us, I think our main thing is we like to get into biblical things like the extra biblical texts. We like to dive in deep into the Bible, and obviously for us, I would say the backbone of everything for our show and the very first episode we did is very much in the same lines as you guys, is Genesis 6. When you don't understand Genesis 6, you're going to have a hard time understanding a lot of the rest of your Bible. There are going to be passages that are going to sail right over your head. You're not going to understand them. You're not going to understand spiritual warfare. And you're not going to understand a lot of things that you're going to read. And it really is pretty key and crucial to understand what's going on in those quick little passages there to really grasp all that, because we tend to look at a lot of the things, on the surface level of societal things that we're dealing with, which is important. We should. But really understanding that there's a deeper thing at work there, and that's the spiritual warfare aspect. So, yeah, we've been going for a little over a year, and that's kind of what we do. I guess you want to cover that, how we got started together and how that story. That's kind of a fun part of the thing too.
Sure. My dad's a pastor at our church, and Kyle started going back there in the spring a year and a half ago, and so we were like at a church cookout or something, and we started talking and just about different things, and I kind of showed my weirdness a little bit. I opened the door and I was like, I better close it real quick because I don't want to scare anybody off. So I slammed the door real quick, but a couple days later I was like, I'm gonna do a podcast.
Yeah.
And it just kind of went from there, and it's just been probably the most wild ride I've ever been on, man.
Sure.
This is like just to see how God's grown it, and every day it's something new. I mean, with the guests we've talked to, my understanding is like I'm no longer on Earth. I'm like somewhere out in space of all the things that I understand now that makes sense.
Yeah, and there's fun things too, like God kind of lining things up before we ever even met each other. And
yeah,
I had been going to a group, a Friday group for a while, and had a couple guys there that we had talked about doing a podcast together. And I had really taken all the steps and secured the domain and everything, and really got the ball rolling on that. And then ultimately they couldn't do it because they both started businesses and just didn't have the time anymore. So it kind of got put in limbo until I met this guy, and he didn't know any of that backstory when he looked at me one day, and we kind of bonded over the love of the extra biblical text in the Book of Enoch and things like that in Genesis 6. And that's when he looked at me and he said, "Hey, do you want to start a podcast?" And he had no idea, like I said, of all that backstory of how things didn't really get lined up to do everything and how everything was ready to go. So it's just kind of incredible. There's been so many little fingerprints of God along the way from that perspective, and he still continues to bless us and bring people on our path. The fact that we're talking to you guys tonight is one of those many blessings. So all praise to him, and excited to dive into his word tonight with you guys and your listeners.
I will say, like, when we started, we was like, if we can reach one person, that's all we wanted. One person. That's all we care about, is reaching one person for God. And we got that confirmation last fall.
Yeah.
And it was like, I said, well, we did our job.
Yeah.
And it was like, we did our job. That's all we've set out to do.
Yeah.
And it's just grown ever since then. And I haven't really worried about anything. It's just like, we just keep doing it and doing it. And it's like, how many hours have we talked together?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. We're up to, you guys know how it goes. I think we're up to pushing 55, 60 episodes, here soon. And each one of them's an hour and a half. So you do the math on that, and we've chewed the fat a lot, man.
Yeah. Before and after shows.
So there you go.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's dope. Mike, have you ever read the Book of Jubilees? I haven't personally. I kind of skimmed through some parts of it
You
just in
didn't
preparation for this show.
you didn't ask Chat GPT to give you like the rundown of it?
I definitely asked ChatGPT to give me some cliff notes.
I
That
could
is
have
for
done that
sure.
and listened for 6 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I've read the Book of Jubilee. I've also read the Book of Jasher. I sort of get those in my mind. I get those confused, but I want to say it's the Book of Jubilee, and I still want to use it somehow in a documentary at the beginning of the documentary, because, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, because I could be wrong. I'm probably wrong, but it's okay. But they talk about the Watcher Stone. Am I in Jubilee
Yeah.
8 or am I in okay, it's in Jubilee 8. And there's a mention about the Watcher Stone, and I envision, like, I don't know, some sort of like documentary or even like a Indiana Jones type of movie where we find the Watcher Stone and it unlocks like hell on earth or something like that. I don't know. But that's what I remember
No,
from it.
Yeah, you got it right, and that's an interesting. That's one of the interesting things about the Book of Jubilees. It is in the Book of Jubilees, and specifically revolves around an individual named Kainam, or sometimes you'll see it pronounced different ways and spelled different ways. And you can, for anybody that is out there and is like, going to listen to any of this, and they're not really quite sure and they're scratching their head, you can actually find out more about this diving into your own Bibles, because if you go into Genesis and you look at the genealogy, you are going to have this individual missing. He's missing from the genealogy in our Bibles, most Bibles, in Genesis, and then also in Chronicles. But when you go to Luke's account of Christ's lineage, this person magically shows up. And when I found that, as I started digging into everything, I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And then when you read the Book of Jubilees, you find out what this individual is responsible for. And I've got it pulled up here, and I'll just go ahead and read it just to make it clear. And it goes right back to what you talked about with this tablet that you're speaking of. So in the 29th Jubilee, and just for anybody that doesn't know, a Jubilee is a cycle of 49 years. Okay. That's how they were told to mark time. And the nice thing about the writing that I have is it actually gives you the year, which is kind of nice. In the first week, so this would be 1373 AM, which is Anno Mundi. So from the creation forward, so starting at 0. At the beginning thereof, Araphashad took himself a wife, and her name was Rehusia, the daughter of Susan, the daughter of Elam, and she bare him a son in the 3rd year in this week. So that's now we're up to 1375 AM, and called his name Kainam. And the son grew, and his father taught him writing, and he went to seek for himself a place where he might seize a city for himself. Now, the interesting thing about this individual, you get a nice clue right there. This dude's not such a good dude, because he's going and he's going to take stuff that doesn't belong to him, right? And it continues on. And he found writing which former generations had carved on the rock, and he had read what was thereon. And it just says, and he sinned, or transcribed it, and sinned owing to it, for it contained the teaching of the watchers, to accordance with which they used to observe the omens of the sun and the moon and the stars and all the signs of heaven. And he wrote it down, and he said nothing regarding it, for he was afraid to speak to Noah about it, lest he should be angry with him on account of it. So, yeah, that's a pretty big event, right? So the whole point, obviously, of the flood is to wipe this clean genetically, but also wipe all of the information that was shared with us that we shouldn't have known off too, because here mankind had used it to basically destroy themselves. And it's just interesting that this particular individual is attached to this story, and we're missing from the account in Genesis and Chronicles, but we are there in Luke.
That is crazy. That is crazy. So, do you think do you think that he preserved it, or just kind of like left it?
Well, I think it's hard to say, because it definitely says the one thing that I tend to think that he probably left it, because it says that he read it, right? Because his dad taught him how to read and write. And it basically says he transcribed it. So he's recording what's on there. And then it just says he sinned owing to it. But the fascinating thing that you find when you kind of take this information and you apply it to modern archaeology for what it's worth, because most modern archaeology isn't worth a whole lot. What you find is every single one of these sites that we talk about, whether it's Machu Picchu in South America or, Göbekli Tepe over in Turkey, or it doesn't matter, wherever you want to go, the pyramids. It's amazing how all this stuff is celestially aligned, right? Either to Orion's belt, to something in the Pleiades, or to the solstices. And it's just interesting that this particular piece of information that it says that he had on here on this Watcher tablet was, how to observe the omens of the sun and the moon and the stars and all the signs in heaven. And here we have all of these sites that magically line up with these different places. Now, I think a lot of those sites were built by the Watchers and their offspring, right? I think that they were probably existed before the flood. But you can also clearly see in a lot of these locations, Machu Picchu is a great example, where you've got these stones that are cut so perfectly, right, that they fit together. You can't even get a blade of grass in between them, a sheet of paper, and they're almost probably watertight with no kind of mortar, right? And then you have other parts of the complex that are more, roughly put together, like more of like what we would expect to find from civilization back when this was supposedly built, right? And it's just interesting to me because you can see that no matter what, whether it's an older site or maybe a newer site, the celestial alignment just plays right down the line the same.
So would some of that information be forbidden knowledge to us? I mean, is it to me, it seems like it's got to be more than just how the solar system works. You know what I mean? There had to have been some sort of like witchcraft or astrology type of teaching in there. What's your speculation?
Yeah, that's kind of the $1 million question because we don't know, right? It's so hard for us to look back because we're looking through this crusted up, foggy lens from the future backward, right? And we don't really know, right? And I wish it went into more detail to describe exactly what that was talking about. But we definitely know that he says he sinned owing to it. So what are some things that we could get into from that? I don't really have a great answer to that. I think that there's a very much a possibility that maybe we did get into some kind of witchcraft or use it for negative means. And, obviously you get to the Aztecs and the Incas and all these and the Mayans and stuff that are obviously observing a lot of these things. And they think they have to sacrifice to other gods on certain dates, in order to appease the gods from a blood perspective. And we definitely can tell, like we had the, Y2K scare. Well, where did that come from? That came from, I believe, the Mayan calendar, right? Where they thought things were going to be the end of time. And the other thing, too, is we can see right out of the gate, one of the first things that we find, and one of the major influences throughout the entire book, is the heavy emphasis on keeping God's calendar intact and recognizing the Sabbath. And one of the first things that when we go back in history, we can find that we really started coming off the tracks is that's one of the first things they did is they started throwing all of the seasons out of whack as far as where we track the calendar dates. We had the Julian calendar before we had the Gregorian calendar that we're on now. And you go back even further than that. And the other thing that you can read in Jubilees is we had all of these feasts, right, to help mark the time. And over time, we've abandoned a lot of these feasts to help mark time and pay reverence to God. So I think there's probably a whole lot of things that tie into that. I don't necessarily think it's any one thing, but you can clearly tell by the setup before this guy finds all this information that he wasn't a good dude.
Yeah.
I will say, the Mayan calendar dates back to when the angels came down.
Does it go all the way back to the Watchers?
Same time.
No, stop. Go figure.
Maybe they knew something.
I'm gonna bet they did. Yeah, and you go like even Native American, right? Like here in America, and you go to these tribes, and we have this crazy false history of Columbus discovered America, which is so stupid because it's like the dude gets off the boat and there are people here, so clearly he didn't discover squat. And we go through the entire country, and we've got mounds, and we've got all these structures, right? These structures that were built. And the Native Americans will even tell you, they're like, yeah, that was here as long as we know. Like, we didn't build them. They were here already. You know, so this goes back a long way. Modern archaeology is never going to admit it, right? Because if they do that, then they're gonna, you know, point to that old crusty book that everybody tries to throw out the door and pretend that it doesn't have any bearing on anything. And unfortunately, it's so funny because the further we go forward in time and the more that we discover and the more that we find, man, it lines up like it fits like Cinderella's slipper, right? When you go
Right.
back and you look at all this stuff.
Right. So with archaeology, and what would be their main I guess tool, or not tool, but their main like point of evidence that they would use to say, well, this is not as old, or this is older than it seems, or this is not as old as it seems. And that seems to me like, the carbon dating, is that even accurate? Is there any, I don't know, is there any evidence that that's just not even close to being accurate?
Carbon dating, as far as just some of the archaeological finds, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, yeah. Just because I feel like that would be one of the things that they could use as a tool to debunk the Bible.
Yeah, they've tried to do that. That's a huge one, Ryan. And I'm by no means a creationist. And
Yeah.
one of the people that's fantastic we had on our show is Kent Hovind. He does a great job refuting all this stuff. But we had a great conversation the other day on the Shroud of Turin with a couple guys on the show, Paul Hansen and a friend of his. And one of the things that they've dug into, the Shroud's a great example of this when it comes to carbon dating. They take a piece of the corner of the cloth and they run it through carbon dating, and they pick and choose what they find, right? What the computer spits out. And ultimately they picked a date around the medieval times to go, well, this is dated from the medieval times. And the truth be told, when they finally dug into all the information and they actually released it all and made it all public, the date on the cloth, that particular swath of cloth, which was tiny, right? Every centimeter you moved, it was like 100 years here, 100 years there. And there was like this huge swath of time that was like 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So every
Wow.
centimeter you go, it's like, 100 years off. And that makes a lot of sense, right? Because we've been in there, we've touched it a bunch, and we've been showing this thing off forever. So carbon dating, I think, is proven to be at this point so flawed. I don't know why we keep using it,
Right.
and it's, the whole concept of the dinosaurs is really kind of silly in my mind. Now, that's just me. I don't want to insult anybody. If you think that, we're a long-term creation, I'm not going to fight with you. But for me, I'm like, okay, well, if we think dinosaurs are responsible for all of our fossil fuels and oil and stuff, explain to me how they wound up in the bottom of the ocean.
Hmm.
How do we have all this massive collection of dead material that's sitting underneath the Pacific and Atlantic and every ocean in the world? And it just doesn't hold, for lack of a better term, water. Yeah. But so it's just kind of silly. I think, and another great one that we reference all the time on the show is Ancient Apocalypse. For anybody that hasn't watched Ancient Apocalypse on Netflix, when you take this information and you plug it into your mind and you watch through that lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
Through the biblical lens, through the Genesis 6 lens, through the pre-flood lens, and you watch that show, man, again, it fits like Cinderella's slipper, right? You're just like, well, I can explain all this, And the best part about that show for me is it's completely done from an agnostic perspective, right? Graham Hancock is the one that's doing that. Graham Hancock, for all intents and purposes that I know, is, kind of agnostic as far as, things go, maybe even atheistic. So he's not coming from any tilt. So you get a nice raw look at the data, the science, and even he's like questioning this stuff because it's not matching the archaeological story, right? We're finding all these sites that don't match the archaeological story. And all of these extra biblical texts and even our own Bibles tell us that that's because it's not true. And the more we find, the more we recognize that old Bible's right. And modern archaeology is just make believe.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so we've got this far in, and I just want to get this question out of the way. You don't need to make it long-winded, but when it comes to some of these extra biblical sources that do tend to give us a little bit more information, can we trust them?
Yeah, here's the simple way to do that. This is exactly what I did. So once I started reading the Book of Enoch, it blew my mind because I'm like, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense when I plug it into the Bible, right? Here's what I would encourage anybody to do. And I would be leery with the newer Christian, right? You need to have some maturity to you and better discernment. So I just want to throw that out there. And there's some mentorship there that we don't do very well these days that can help with that, but that's another discussion. But whenever you read something, and I encourage you to read it, whenever you read something, take that information and plug it into the Bible. If you can punch holes in it with the Bible, you should probably be pretty leery of that information. However, if you can plug it into the Bible and it confirms a lot of things and they complement each other, I would say that you're probably in pretty good hands. That's a great way to kind of have that discernment and thoroughness to figure out whether or not it's good or not.
Yeah, no, I agree, because you're gonna have peers of that time that were writing on similar subjects, and one may have been inspired by Holy Spirit, but then another one just may have been inspired because of the person's interest, and it's giving more to the story, it's lending more to, I guess, the culture itself. So what do you think, Chris? We need to get some more fringy stuff out of the Book of Jubilee. We need another crazy story.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask you, Kyle. What do you guys think? Give us some more fringe from the book, and if you can tie into that, what are the benefits of studying the book of, is it Jubilee or Jubilees? I don't want to get this one wrong. All Jubilees, right. Yeah. Jubilees, like Revelations.
The book, wait, Revelations. Wait, is it? No, I'm kidding. So wait, it's the Book of Jubilee?
Jubilees with an S on the end.
Okay, so take out
the like S. Illinois.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there you go.
Illinois. Except you pronounce the S.
Yeah, I still see the comments of people. Gary Wayne. So I don't know if you guys are probably familiar with Gary Wayne, but yeah. Gary Wayne says Revelations all the time. Right, it's just he just says it, but I'll see comments all day long like, oh, I can't listen to this guy, he said Revelations. I'm like, you're missing you're missing out stuff. You're missing out. But if
that's why Mike, I threw that out there. I was trying to keep the corrections in the comments down.
Yes,
one of my favorite things in Jubilees is the story between Jacob and Esau. You don't get this from the Bible. I think it would be an awesome Western to make this, because once when their dad and mom die, Esau's sons are like, hey, let's go take your birthright. Let's go kill your brother. And so there's a war. They get like Esau gets thousands of men to fight his brother. So they're standing in this tower, and Judah said, here's your bow, Dad. Take him out. And so he pulls back the bow, shoots Esau right in the chest with an arrow. Boom, he's dead. Then he shoots and kills his oldest son. Boom, he's dead. And they slaughtered all but I think 3 of Esau's sons. They killed them all, and they put them in servitude to them for the rest, said, until to this day. So when Moses wrote that on Mount Sinai, so you figure that's a long time. But that would be an awesome movie to be made. You could do it as a Western. Yeah. You wouldn't have to be like time.
Yeah, spin it up on a modern tilt.
And the fact that we don't get that in the Bible, because in the Bible, you in Genesis, you have this happy, oh, they went away, they hugged and whatever, worked their thing out, and they went away. No, he was still mad that he took his birthright, but God hated Esau. I think a lot of people forget that. They said God hated him because he sold his birthright. So God was dealing out his judgment through that. And I think
it says that in the Bible, God hated Esau.
Yeah,
it's not extra biblical.
I just had this thought. It doesn't say, But I think Prince Mestima probably made him do that anyway. It doesn't say it, but Prince Mestima is like the main character through Jubilees as the adversary, I will say, quote unquote. And he does all of this crazy stuff, and he asks for permission.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. It even hinted towards guardian angels for the brothers.
Oh yeah, each one of them had like
a guardian with them.
Yeah.
All right, so yeah, expound on that.
I believe we all have guardian angels. I mean, it says, I think if I can remember which extra biblical text book, I think it was one that Paul wrote that did get canonized. I can't remember the name of it, but it says that of an evening, our angel goes before God and tells God everything we did.
Oh crap!
For the day.
Yeah,
yes.
right.
Yeah. And
so it's like says, Santa Claus, just be good, boys.
And it says the day you die, it goes in front of God, and God asks it, was it redeemed? And the angel said, I've done everything I could, but it was not redeemed.
Where is this?
It's one of one of, I think Paul wrote it, but it wasn't canonized. I cannot remember it. Don't quote me on that.
I'm gonna do a search on this while you guys are talking.
Okay, so you're saying it's a book that Paul wrote, but that's not in the biblical canon.
Yeah, because it was too crazy. It was like way out there. And so,
and are we sure? Are we sure that Paul wrote it? Like, is the authorship solid on that?
It went along with his story of when he went into the third heaven.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one too.
I think.
Okay, interesting.
I want to say 3rd Corinthians, because there's a first, like 2nd Corinthians in our Bible is actually 3rd Corinthians, but the one that is missing, it was like first, it would be 2nd, but it would be 3rd Corinthians since we don't have it, if that makes sense. So my dad's quoted that from the pulpit before.
Yeah. Yeah, man. There's like, we could literally spend 15 shows diving into the stuff that Jubilees gets into. Here's another great one that applies to modern day, that you're not going to get in the Bible just because it doesn't get into the detail, right? That's what we find when we read the Bible, is it doesn't always provide a lot of the details for things for us, and it provides detail, but it doesn't provide it for us the way that we need it nowadays, because it wasn't written for us, right? It was written for, ancient Hebrew, the Jewish, the Israelites. So when we try to look at it through that Western lens, man, we just don't get it. And what we see is Table of Nations, Genesis 10, I believe, right? Yeah. Genesis 11, Genesis 10 is the Table of Nations. So you get this division, right, of like how the sons, and that's where we start to see the lineage, and we don't see this individual kainim show up in that account. But one of the things that you find in Jubilees and that we will not get in the Bible is God is actually promising Abraham to give him back what belongs to him anyway. The promised land was their land by right. And what you find is, Canaan was given so they get off the boat, right? Noah divides the earth between his 3 sons. Shem gets a larger portion because he was the oldest son. But everybody gets their allotment. And then what they did is the 3 boys divided their land up among their boys, right? Their sons. And so everybody has their allotment, and they tell Noah this before he dies, and everybody agrees. And then Canaan didn't like what he was given. Okay. And so he went in and he's like, I'm going to take this land right here, which is modern day Israel. Okay. That was not his land. That was his uncle Shem's land. And his brothers and his father tell him, don't do that. You're going to be cursed forever, and all of your family, if you do that. And he didn't listen. And he went in and he took it anyway. And so you can actually go in the Bible and verify this if you go back and you look, that what is being given to Abraham in the promised land and all of the lineage after him is they're being given back what rightfully belongs to them anyway, because his lineage tracks back to Shem. So when we see that, modern day problems over there, people don't understand the backstory of how, the Israelites came to that land. Like they didn't take anything. That's their land. It belongs to them from a biblical lineage perspective. And you get a very detailed account in the book of Jubilees that you're not going to get in Genesis or anywhere else for that matter in the Bible. And so that's just a couple things. Like he mentioned Mastema. That's another fascinating thing we can get into if you want, but that kind of answers some of your questions.
Yeah, I did find
Yeah,
it.
tell me.
I found a Third Corinthians that didn't make it into the
Yeah, I don't know how far it was. Like I said, I don't know if it was Third Corinthians, but I remember I got that from actually Zen Garcia.
Yeah.
So Zen, I was
Zen's read every extra biblical
if you don't
thing
know who
written.
Zen Garcia is, you got to look him up. I mean, he has. If you want to know anything about it, everything, Zen Garcia is your guy. I mean, he's written like 54 books
Oh yeah.
on missing ancient texts. He's
the one to go to for extra biblical text for sure.
yeah.
Did he used to roll with Rob Skiba?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. I just remember
Yeah.
that. I remember that name off of like their online church, if that was indeed him. But yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know there was a third epistle. I did know that there was a lost. There was another epistle that Paul wrote to Laodicea that I wish I could get my hands on that. But apparently it's been lost. I don't know. But I would.
Yeah.
I just want to
Is it
know.
lost? Really? Is it?
I just want to. I want to know the butt smacking they got, because they were the bad ones.
Right. One of the things you find out, man, when you start going down this rabbit hole, right, and you get into Genesis 6, you get into Enoch, you get into some of these extra biblical texts, and the Book of Jubilees was found in abundance in Qumran. Now, in abundance is a relatively loose term because we have scraps, right? We have fragments. We don't have entire books, right? So to say that there's more copies of something found here or there is kind of a little bit of a misnomer because these things are ripped into pieces. But they found a ton of Enoch, they found a ton of Jubilees, and one of the things you dive into when you get into the history of you start reading these books and you're like, man, why isn't this not in our Bible? What's going on with that? Because if you feel like it should be, then why isn't it there? And these two specific books, Enoch and Jubilees, are in the Ethiopian and Eritrean Bibles. And pretty much from everybody can tell, have always been in there, right? As far as everybody knows. So it's kind of curious. And you start to dive into the history, and this goes back to 160 BC, as far as what we can tell, that I've put together so far from the Maccabean War period. That's when that all kind of went down, the Maccabean Revolt. And that's how you get the Pharisees come to power. And when the Pharisees came to power, they threw out all of the Levite priesthood, right? The Aaronic line, because Aaron was the one that was put in charge of the priesthood. And, they threw all the Levites out and they replaced them with the Pharisees. And so they were a sect that had kind of come out of that war mindset of the Maccabean War period. And it's interesting because, allegedly the group that was in Qumran, where we find all these texts, they were Essenes. I don't believe that to be true. Essenes were actually south of there. We found them in Gedai and some other camps. I personally think, this is just my opinion, that I think that Levite line wound up in Qumran because we have never found a single scrap of anything to do with the Maccabean period in Qumran. So it sure seems like whoever was there was not very favorable to the Maccabees, right? And we also find during that time, okay, if they're going to do that, then they're going to start kind of scrubbing the record, if you will, of what they want and what they don't want to focus on as far as the Messiah and a lot of other things. And so, you get a lot of that stuff removed, and it makes a lot of sense because look how they treated Christ. They wanted him to bring war. I mean, look what they did when he was reading out of Isaiah in his hometown. They were going to throw him off a cliff when he didn't read what they wanted him to read about all the warmongering that they thought the Messiah was going to bring. And of course, he admits that he's the Messiah in front of them. And they we watched you grow up and you're being a heretic. So we're going to toss you off a cliff for it. But Jesus also makes a comment in Matthew 23, and he tells them he's right at the top. And he tells the disciples, because he's sitting in front of the temple, and he's telling the crowd, really, you need to listen to the Pharisees and Sadducees because they are teaching you the law, but don't do what they do because they're hypocrites. But you do need to listen to them because they sit in Moses' seat. That's actually from the Bible. Mm-hmm. And most of us don't catch that because it's like, well, why? Okay, that's strange. Why would he say that? Well, when you now snap that into the context that I just gave you about the 160 BC Maccabean War period and how they kicked out all the Levite line, that's exactly what he's saying. He's pointing at these guys and he's like, they're not the true priests. They're in that seat and they're fulfilling that duty, and they are trying to teach you the law, but they're being hypocrites because they're not following the law and they're using it to kind of beat you down. You look like you found something over there.
Oh, just keep going.
Well, that's pretty much it. It's
And their father was a murderer and a liar from the beginning, is what he said.
oh yeah, talking about how they're the sons of the devil.
Yeah,
and Satan.
I believe that.
Oh yeah, this goes back. You going back to Cain?
I'm going back to
Okay, yeah.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh.
That sounds like the old serpent seed.
Yeah, I believe that. I truly believe that. I really do. I mean, everything through scripture, that's like, why would Jesus say that then?
Yeah, I don't. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, and yeah, we get into a lot of things
Yeah.
too, like Edom, and the Edomites come from Esau's line, and there's a lot of things that we just don't understand because we're trying to look back through this lens of time that's thousands and thousands of years and how everything was divided up. But you get into some of these texts, and it sure helps you a lot.
I will say what I found going back to the pyramids. This is in Isaiah 19:19. This is interesting. On that day, there will be an altar to Adonai in the middle of the land of Egypt, as well as a standing stone for Adonai and its border.
Yeah, talking about you think the pyramids are that?
Yeah, because some translations say pyramids.
Huh.
Some
That's
people,
interesting.
yeah. If like some people believe that when the Watchers were here, they built these pyramids because it reminded them of heaven. And so they had all these things built. And once when they were here, they couldn't go back to heaven. I think it was in one of the, the Wisdom of Solomon, where he would, I don't know if you guys know this, he supposedly had a ring where he could torture demons.
Yep.
And so he would learn all the things. And supposedly they admitted building all this stuff.
You mean like the Ring of Power and
a sling ring?
Okay. Yeah.
It's like, that goes back into a lot of the Masonic folklore as well, of how Solomon manipulated the demons, or the jinn, however your perspective you're reading it from, to build the temple itself. And that was where the Freemason cult, that faction started, of those people building the temple with the demons too, because there was humans building it too, and they started this secret society out of it. And it seems to make a lot of sense. I mean, why are they still around today with all kinds of crazy beliefs? Where'd they get those beliefs?
So is this the part where I tell them I used to be a Freemason?
Yeah.
Dun, dun, dun.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
Dude, let it all out, man.
So I was only in for a year and a half, right? And I definitely think that this is you heard the old saying of frog in boiling water, right? You put the frog in the water, you slowly heat it up to a boil, and he doesn't even know he's boiling to death. But if you throw him in the water right out of the gate, then he jumps out. Okay.
Right.
It's very much a frog in boiling water thing, right? And even someone as versed in scripture as me, it's easy for you to get sucked into that and not understand what's really happening because it's so well covered. Okay. There's this huge doctrine of light that they teach you. And I'll get into that in a second, but going back to your point, the whole mythology, okay, is built around Solomon's temple, as you said, right? And the creation of Solomon's temple. And specifically around the individual who I believe we can actually find in the Bible. His name was Hiram Abiff. He was the one that was in charge of building Solomon's temple. Well, Hiram is murdered by 3 workmen. And so the first 3 degrees of Freemasonry, all right, which is entered apprentice, fellow craft, and then master mason, are all built around that story, that lore, Solomon's temple, and the murder. Okay. And when you go through the initiate ceremonies, you're actually kind of the centerpiece of the play, if you will, And the last one in the Master Mason, which you can go find online, people have snuck cameras in, and so it's all there. You are basically playing the role of Hiram Abiff in there, and you get murdered. You know, that's what they do. And so it's just very dark. And one of the things that they present to you is they use the Bible, right? They have a King James Bible cracked open on the altar. You are, no matter what faith you are, you're still going to reference all of the ceremonial references are all to Scripture. So it's really easy for you to go, well, they're using the Bible, they're using Scripture. This can't be all bad, right? My grandfather, in my case, was a Freemason. He was one of the best Christian men I've ever known. But what you find out is this doctrine of light, right? You want more light, and to seek what you think is God's light. It's not God's light. It's Lucifer. It's Luciferian, right? And we can see this in the Bible as well. Both Christ and Satan are referred to as light, right? It's just Lucifer is a counterfeit version of it. All right. And when you start digging into the history of Freemasonry and people who hold in high esteem in Freemasonry, such as Albert Pike is one of the first ones I would send people to go read. If you're a Freemason, go read some of the things that Albert Pike said, you know, because they didn't mince words back in the day, and they didn't hide it like they hide now, you know, back in the 1800s. He's giving an address to a bunch of, you know, 32nd degree Scottish Rite, 33rd, 32nd, 31st, you know, whatever, all these high end guys in the Scottish Rite. And he's telling them that the doctrine of Luciferianism is, you know, that's what this is all about, and how Adonai is judging Lucifer and being cruel to Lucifer, and that he's actually the good God and God is the bad God. Adonai's bad and Lucifer is good. And you can go read this as his own words. So, you know, it's just crazy how all of that is built on satanic worship. And the further you get in, the more is revealed to you. So it's that slow bath, right? And a lot of people don't understand how it works. Just to kind of highlight the structure of the pyramid, right? Every single Mason has to become a Master Mason. So that third degree, right? In what they call Blue Lodge. You start in Blue Lodge. And then from there, you can choose to go into the Scottish Rite, which most everybody's familiar with, and you have 33 degrees in the Scottish Rite. The 33rd degree is actually an honorary degree. You can't earn it yourself. It has to be bestowed upon you. And you also have things like the York Rite. And the York Rite is all devised around Christianity, right? It has a Christian-centric focus. Whereas a lot of the Scottish Rite stuff, when you go in there and you look, is very Egyptian, occultish, built around Osiris. There's a really good documentary on Amazon Prime called 33 and Beyond that was actually put together by Freemasons. And it's incredible what they share on there. And so you can clearly see the occultist stuff, especially in the Scottish Rite. The dangerous one for me, I think, is in the York Rite, because you're being, you know, kind of put into this. It's all supposed to be non-denominational, but you have to believe in God, right? But you're being put into this. And the York Rite specifically has a Christian focus, right? So you're being targeted specifically with your faith, but they're giving you this tilt, right? That's all still built around Luciferianism. And when you arrive at the 9th, because there are 9 degrees inside of the York Rite, when you arrive at the 9th degree in the York Rite, you're actually a Templar Knight, is what the designation is. So there are other groups within that too, like the people know the Shriners, and some people may have heard of the Grotto before. But ultimately, all of it really is a club that is deceiving literally millions of men into thinking that they're doing something good, because there are a lot of charitable stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's really something that's built on Luciferianism and Satan worship.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Like, they just like flip the script on the way that the Bible is told. And one Freemason put it this way. He said that we know your Bible. He would say your Bible is correct. Okay. 100% correct. But the perception around that Bible, your perception is incorrect, because of how God punished Lucifer for essentially trying to set men free, like to set us free from this prison planet. And Yahweh was, essentially the warden and wanted to keep us all in line. And that Lucifer came in to free us from that. And that was a good thing what Lucifer did.
Right.
And then that's where that perception is. We just have a higher perception of what was really going on. But then I told this guy, I told him, I said, well, let me just say this, man. Like I was free from Yahweh most of my life, and all of that stuff, the sex, drugs, rock and roll, being an a-hole, being a manipulative person with women, all of that stuff led me to a life that I very, very much did not like. It led me to a life of slavery where I had to get my drugs. I had to get my sin in. And that's what I was living my life for. And it was for nothing. And ever since I've been living for Christ, I feel free. So I asked the guy, what do you think of that? And he's like, well, to each his own.
Yeah.
You got no answer to that,
Yeah, it's something. I'm trying to find the letter that I sent that had all that information on there about the Luciferian aspect of what was discussed by Albert Pike. So I'll dig here and I'll see if I can pull it up. But yeah,
All goes back
Kyle,
yeah, it's pretty insane. But it does, man. It all goes back to that war between Adonai and Satan. Always does.
Kyle,
Sorry, go ahead.
what led you to kind of denouncing, rejecting, breaking that oath? I'm assuming with the Freemasons.
I was praying.
Yeah, I never had a settled spirit about it. What drew me in was my grandfather. And I think this is a story with a lot of Freemasons. We kind of had a lost generation in there of our fathers, really, and they've had a huge decline in membership. But my grandfather again was one of the best Christian men I've ever known. No doubt about where he is, and I will see him again someday. I have no doubt in my mind. And those aren't hollow words. I think we see that a lot, unfortunately in the world. And I got in there, and the more I experienced, I'm vetting this because I went in and I heard you hear a lot of crazy stuff, and a lot of it's not accurate, right? To be fair to the Masons, a lot of the things that you hear just aren't accurate,
Like what?
Well, I think a lot of it is that, the ceremonies are blood ceremonies and you have to swear blood oaths or that you're actually having blood drawn. And, you hear a lot of things that when you get in there and you actually start to get into Freemasonry, you just find out aren't true, right? That it's open, Luciferian worship. They don't hide it. Like the minute that, lodge begins, like there's satanic ritual. It's not that overt. Okay. It's much more covert than that.
At least until you get to those higher degree levels. Yeah.
And even then, I like to say, that's the carrot you'll never bite, right? It's never as overt as that, because I know a lot of guys that are 33rd degree Scottish Rite Masons, right? And have been Masons for a long time and have gone very high in Masonry. And I think that it's just more covert than that. It's not really overt because you hear rumblings and you hear things about, certain ceremonies, even though you haven't experienced them. And it's a perfect place to draw men into Luciferianism because one of the things that we have right now especially in America, but really probably around the globe, which Christ warned us, is, people just don't know their Bibles and they don't have good, solid relationships with God and with Christ. I know how much I was getting pulled in, even knowing my Bible and having a good relationship. But I think it was that good relationship that saved me because I just never had a settled spirit, right? The Holy Spirit was always stirring. I had people praying for me. And eventually I just found stuff and I got to get out.
Yeah. Kyle, so you would disagree then with Gary Wayne, who has stated that to become a 33rd degree Mason, there's human sacrifice involved. he said that, and he said that any lodge where there are 33rd degree Masons, there's human sacrifice and human trafficking going on in those lodges, and that it's driven by the Masons.
Well, there's a couple of problems that I would have right out of the gate with that. I would want to find out more exactly specifically that was said, but there's not really any specific lodge per se for a 33rd degree Mason. They do have meetings on the regular, but I can tell you that if there were human sacrifice involved with some of the guys that I've talked to that were 33rd degree, I mean, I would be surprised. That would be beyond surprised, just because I think it's such a duplicitous thing in order to get to that point that I think it would have shown itself. I think that anything that we're talking about like that, if it is occurring, is happening well beyond that 33rd degree level. I think because you got to think that I know guys that are 33rd degree Masons that haven't really held any high office even in their own state, let alone on a higher level than that beyond the state. And I think until you get to that upper echelon of people, you're probably not going to get into that club if it is happening to that level, just because that's too many people, right? And too hard to probably control some of that. But I want to read this to you guys, and it's not long, just very quickly, because I did find the letter which had my resignation letter to the lodge, because it does have this quote that I was referencing earlier from Albert Pike, and he is addressing the 23 Supreme Councils of the world, as far as, because he was about as high as you can get in Freemasonry. And here's the quote: "That which we must say to the crowd is, we worship a God, but it is a God one adores without superstition. To you, Sovereign Grand Inspector General, we say this, and you may repeat it to the brethren of the 32nd, 31st, and 30th degrees." Now, notice 33rd wasn't mentioned in there. "The Masonic religion," that's problem number one, right, "should be by all of us initiates of the high degrees maintained in the purity of the Luciferian doctrine. If Lucifer were not God, would Adonai, the God of the Christians, whose deeds prove cruelty, perfidy, and hatred of man, barbarism and repulsion for science, would Adonai and his priests calumniate him? Yes, Lucifer is God, and unfortunately Adonai is also God. For the eternal law is that there is no light without shade, no beauty without ugliness, no white without black. For the absolute can only exist as two gods, darkness being necessary for light to serve as its foil, as the pedestal is necessary to the statue, and the brake to the locomotive. Thus, the doctrine of Satanism is heresy, and the true, pure, philosophical religion is the belief in Lucifer, the equal of Adonai, but Lucifer, God of light and God of good, is struggling for humanity against Adonai, the God of darkness and evil." That is a direct quote, gentlemen, from Albert Pike.
So I guess my question is, how can you be a Mason and a Christian? Because I don't think that you can be.
No, the two are in complete. You just read it, right? You can't have one thing that's pulling you into Satanism and saying that Lucifer is the equal of God and that he's actually fighting against God and it's God who's bad, which goes right along with what you just actually said a second ago, right? About how this individual tried to convince you, because they have been convinced that Satan was actually doing a good thing, trying to set us free from the evil trappings of God, right?
Right.
It fits to a T with what you just said. And that's because that's the real doctrine right there. The two are not compatible. And it just, thankfully I had people praying for me. I had this guy next to me. I had other people, and I had that Holy Spirit, man. That's the single biggest thing. I just never felt settled.
I will say one thing. I never had a conversation with him.
That's true.
About it. I never did.
That's very true.
Because what I said, that's between you and God. I can't tell you what you can and can't do. I said, that's what you're gonna have to figure that for yourself, between you and God.
Yeah.
And I left it at that. I mean,
And how long ago, Kyle, was that you came out of Freemasonry?
Man, I left Freemasonry at the end of last year, so it's really not been that long. So we were literally doing our show and everything.
Yeah.
We had started our show and had probably gotten into around November of last year. I want to say. I think it was right around that
it was
time
like,
frame.
and it was like our friendship was growing.
Yeah.
And it was just like, he's like, man, I'm going to do something. I'm like, what are you going to do? He goes, I think I'm going to leave. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. And I never once.
Yeah. And it's really sad because, man, I had built good relationships with a lot of those guys in my lodge. I like those guys. They're good guys, you know, and they don't realize they're being led astray. And a lot of those guys, I had several men around me that were 32nd, 33rd degree Masons in Scottish Rite, right? And had been in for 40, 50, 60 years in some instances. I talked to these guys.
I will say about the sacrifice, we're just in Indiana.
Yeah, right.
You know, that,
yeah,
anything's possible.
Yeah.
You know,
that higher, I would not, I think that we're dealing with forces that are so evil these days, gentlemen, that I would not take that out of the realm of possibility. I think some of that just may be a little misinformed by somebody who hasn't actually been a Mason. And not to argue with Gary, because I haven't been that high of a Mason either, but I have been in the occult, right? I have been in the cult. It's sad to say. And I have experienced it. So I have a little bit more experience than someone who's never been in there before to tell you how it really works. It's so funny because a business meeting that you go to every month is the most boring thing in the world. You know, you do a quick little ceremony and then, you know, it's very on the surface benign. There's still probably some things in there that are concerning, but it's pretty benign. And then you literally talk about paying bills and what's coming up on the agenda, and it's pretty boring. There's no secret goat riding or you know, any crazy things that are happening in your local lodges.
Well, as far as you know, as a low level Mason, but I mean, I would think, and this is from talking to Gary and other people who have been in that world and studied Freemasonry, like the frog in the pot, right? It's a literal process of brainwashing over the course of time, and Gary even said too that any Masons, and again, probably not your low level guys like where you are at, but guys that have been in there for a long time and have you know risen their ranks, that if they're involved in churches, he was saying it's simply it's an aspect of deception. They're there to essentially water down and manipulate people in their understanding of scripture, and lead people astray, as we've been talking about.
Well enough, it doesn't need any help.
Yeah. Yeah, the church is struggling already. And again, I'm not here to refute Gary. He's done a lot of studies on it at a deep level. I can just tell you from my perspective and my experience, and some of that I don't disagree with Gary. I definitely think that it's not going to be your standard even 33rd degree Mason that has 60 years in that's roaming around. It's going to be somebody that's really been involved, right? Really gotten into things. They've started holding high offices in states, even maybe higher levels than that. Those are the guys that are going to be really doing the wicked stuff. But what I will agree on 150,000%, having been there and watched it happen, even beginning to me, the slow bath of indoctrination, right? And the brainwashing, 100%. You just said it a second ago. Again, that's perfect with what I just read to you from Albert Pike and what you just talked about a second ago with how this person has obviously been brainwashed into thinking that Satan wasn't such a bad dude and he's actually here to look out for us. It's just like, dude, look around you. You think Satan's looking out for us? Are you out of your mind? Yeah. He doesn't care about us. He just wants to destroy us because he wants to hurt God, right? He can't do nothing with your soul. You know, he just wants to destroy your soul for all time because it hurts God. That's it.
And it goes back to the garden.
100%.
What are the things that Satan promised?
Mm-hmm.
Be like God.
That's right. Yeah.
You're not going to die.
Yeah.
And you'll have knowledge.
Yeah. It all goes back to spiritual warfare, you know, and for me, I was at two very different places in my life, right? I got this huge spiritual growth on the one hand where I'm seeing the spiritual warfare. And then on the other hand, I'm like being involved in this entity that I just don't feel settled about. And then when I started to really get in there and really dig, and I found some of the stuff that I just read to you, I'm like, dude, I'm out of here. I'm gonzo.
Yeah,
This is nuts.
he sent that to me in a text, and I was reading it, and I'm like, yeah,
Well, that seals that deal.
like, I didn't want to say, but I was like, I knew that, and it was just like, because
He's a bad friend.
yeah, it's not my business
Yeah,
to.
no.
It is, but it isn't.
Yeah.
I'm not. I'd rather be supportive in your decision
Yeah.
rather than pushing you away, because my dad's family, there's all kinds of Masons in my dad's family, and it kind of split my dad's family up, because you have your Christians and you have your Masons, and you have the Masons that, it's okay. We have a cousin or a uncle or something that was like a grand poobah or whatever in one of the lodges,
Yeah.
and so it's always been a, bad taste in my mouth, but I never once told Kyle I didn't like him. I never once said I don't want anything to do with him, because I was like, well, God will figure this out.
Yeah. It's an interesting time. And for me, having, decided to make the dive into God, right? And I've never had a better time in my life than I am from that perspective right now, from my faith. And I just hope that, even as the small time that I spent there, I can steer men away, because here's the reality of what you're being indoctrinated into. And that's just what it is. You hit the nail on the head. You brainwashing, indoctrination, right? Gary and I may not see things equal. I haven't done a study that he has, so he's probably more versed in some of that stuff than I. But at the end of the day, we agree on the most important fact, which is, dude, this is bad.
Mm-hmm.
Don't do it, okay? And man, I got to tell you, if I put that letter from Albert Pike in front of somebody's face and they still keep going forward with that, man, I don't know how strong of a Christian you really are in the first place, because I don't know about you gentlemen, but when I read that for the first time, and maybe that's the first time you're hearing it, I'm like, that pretty much spells out exactly, very clearly to me, what this is really about.
I will say, the thing about Kyle is he practices what he preaches. I'm gonna tell on you for a minute.
All right.
He left his employer because they were wanting to do things that were against Scripture. He left his employer and to do what God wanted him to do. It's been over a year, and he's the only person that I know that was brave enough to step out and say, God, I don't know what you want me to do, but I'm going to do this. And that's amazing, for the fact that he's trusting God every single day. He's trusting God.
Thanks, brother. Boy, that's true.
And so it's like, I was talking to a guy one day, and he believes in the Anunnaki. We come from the Anunnaki. And he goes, do you know anybody that truly lives their faith? And I said, yeah, I know a guy. He does. And it was like, he goes, you need to hang on to him. And so it was like, he goes, I would like to meet him, because very few Christians live their faith.
Yeah, it's sad.
And so
It's true, though.
yeah,
That's really sad.
Yeah. Well, kudos to you, man, for holding to your values, and for having the humility to walk away from an organization like that. Your previous employer, and the Masons, because I know I can see the appeal and the draw for a lot of people, as far as the brotherhood aspect, or even like the connections that it seems like that you get, because it seems like a lot of Masons are just very well connected, so kind of a you scratch my back, I scratch yours kind of thing, as far as I understand it.
Oh yeah, there's a deep, strong brotherhood connection and tie, and some really amazing stories of that connection. And that's the confusing part of all of it, right? Because there are good aspects of it, but the good aspects are just there to masquerade and hide all of what's really there under the surface, right? And that's sad, because really these good aspects are what we should be forming in church under God's word and under God's way. But we've been weakened so much as a body of believers that, we just aren't there. And so men are trying to find that bond of brotherhood anywhere they can find it because of how bad the church is decayed.
Yeah.
No, that's sad, but the fact of it. So,
Yeah.
I want to get back to Jubilees.
no. Yeah, we took a detour there. I was
Yeah,
not
we did.
expecting.
Well, listen, that
That's okay. Again, at the end of the day, if it helps to serve, no. If it helps to serve your bloody way, then I'm down.
Reason why I want to get back to Jubilees is because all this goes back to that.
Yeah, it does. It's spiritual warfare.
It's the spiritual warfare of two enemies that, or I would say one enemy, but they're mortal enemies.
Yeah.
And it goes back to Babylon.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to Genesis, your seed and hers, right?
Genesis 6, then the garden. It just keeps building and building. And where we are today, do you believe anything you see on TV?
No. Listen, even reality shows are scripted and are not real.
Oh, man.
So
hey, leave wrestling alone.
You just found Ben's kryptonite. But you know what? It's between him and God. I'll just pray for him.
There you go.
It's real.
No, but it is, man. And that's the thing is like, I made a decision, and I made a decision that, listen, I did it my way for 40 years,
Yeah.
And I'm ashamed to say that I am the poster child of, or I was, not now, but I was the poster child of lukewarm. I'll spit you out of my mouth because you're neither hot nor cold. And I think we got a lot of me's in the world, right? I wasn't raised in a bad environment. I was raised in the church. And I think sometimes that's the most dangerous place to be because you're just lukewarm. You're stagnant in your faith and you're just checking boxes. And that's not useful to God. This is useful to God and useful to bringing other people to God because the time is drawing near. I think all of us look at what's going on in the world and go, man, I don't know how much time we've got left. And, I like to say the mission never changes, whether it's 5 days before, Christ comes back or 50,000 years, it doesn't matter. The mission never changes. And that's to win as many souls to Christ as we can before it's too late. And we're running out of sand in the hourglass, right? We're watching the last few grains drop through. I just don't know how we can continue on the path we're on technologically and with all the genetic manipulation we're doing and the transhumanism we're getting involved in. And there's no way we've got a bunch of time left. We're running out. So, and all of these old books, when you get in there and you read them, this is not the first rodeo, right? We've been through this before and history's repeating itself.
Yeah. So what does, what in the overall sense, like what is the Book of Jubilees teaching us about the warfare, about the spiritual warfare?
Yeah. So really, where you really need to start is where this picks up in your Bible is actually, I got it written down here, is Exodus 24:12, where you would see where Jubilees would fit in. And this is while Moses is up on the mountain for 40 days and God is having an angel dictate to him everything that has transpired from the beginning up to that point. And really what you're getting in this book is you're actually getting in some ways, in a lot of ways, a much more detailed version of account of events of that spiritual warfare and the splitting of the setting aside of the Abraham and all of the line after him, because that's the start. The spiritual warfare goes back to the garden. You get a much more detailed account of what happened in the garden to set up the spiritual warfare. You get a much more detailed account of what happened after the garden to continue to set up the spiritual warfare. You get the flavor and in some ways more details of the Genesis 6 events.
Yeah.
Because it talks about some of that in more detail too, because you wind up with creating these entities that then have other children, right? And offspring. And we've got all these hybrid things running around everywhere. You get that. You get the Kainam thing. So you can understand how we once again have turned away from God and we're turning back to things that we shouldn't be touching, right? You can see the stealing of the land. And so you just get this thread that runs right through Jubilees from cover to cover, from start to finish. The Esau and Jacob story.
And I like it how at the Tower of Babel, God said he put Hebrew in Abraham's tongue.
Yeah. You get to find out, about that too, of how we had Hebrew reintroduced to try to, help bring things back together, because ultimately we had this collapse. It led to the flood. And here we go again, right after the flood. We're right back on this train. That's why God's like, okay, well, I'm going to have my chosen people. I'm going to have, Abraham's line, the Israelites, and then I'm going to hand the rest of everybody else over because you guys won't follow me. I'm going to hand you over to the Elohim that we talk about in Psalm 82. And that's another thing we don't understand, right? We don't understand how those little g gods, and if you mention those at any point, then, oh my gosh, people just lose their minds because they think you're engaging in monotheism, or polytheism, and you're not. You're explaining what the Bible says. So you can see throughout this entire book as a deeper recounting of history of Genesis, how spiritual warfare just runs the thread right through these and all these stories. Clearly.
And it has the calendar with it.
Yeah, and has the proper calendar with it, right? And how we've abandoned that, how we've abandoned these festivals and these paying tributes to God, and how to mark our seasons. It makes so much sense, because if you think even from a calendar perspective, and that's all by design, right? Satan's designed to throw us off, right? As far as we can throw everything away from the worshiping of God, right? That we can draw people in and we can destroy their souls. And, the way the Hebrews actually accounted for the calendar, and it makes a ton of sense. Wouldn't you start the calendar during spring, right? You would start with spring, and then you would go all the way through winter, and that would be the year. That's why you have, I think, April is the beginning of the true Hebrew calendar. So we're getting ready to have the festival of the trumpets, right? Feast of Trumpets. And that heralds in the next year, but this year is actually the year of Jubilee. So this next year,
170th.
Yeah, 170th Jubilee. A lot of people don't know that, right? And we don't understand any of that stuff. And this just helps us get back to God, and we see that spiritual warfare.
I was 107th or 120th.
Something, I forget it. Maybe it's 120th Jubilee. I'd have to do the math real quick.
I figured up Christ did as many miracles too. I figured that up one day.
Oh yeah. There were 70 miracles. I think.
70th
Jubilee.
70th Jubilee.
Yeah.
Nice.
Christ, 70 miracles, and now we're getting ready to have our 70th Jubilee. So that's kind of fascinating.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Kyle, Ben, appreciate you guys coming on and joining us tonight. If people want to find you guys, where can they find you?
Yeah, best place to go, head over to our website, thetfhc.com. You can find everything over there. We got a guest tab on there. You can check out all the guests we've had on. We have all of our episodes over there too, so you can listen right on the website, get some merch, support us. We would really appreciate it.
Even the banned episodes.
Yeah, all the banned ones. So the ones you can't find on YouTube because they were too hot for YouTube, or we've even faced censorship on Spotify in one instance. So you can go over and check out all those episodes and listen for yourself and make up your own mind so that the censors don't tell you what to think. So thetfhc.com.
Awesome. I will put a link to the website in the show notes when this episode drops so people can check you out.
Perfect, man. We really appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Guys,
absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate you having us on.
Yeah, we'll have to have you guys back on again, and we can go a little bit further down this rabbit hole. But yeah, you guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks.
It's great to meet you.
Yeah.
Yeah, good to see you guys. Good to meet you.
Yeah, brother. Thanks a lot.
All right, camp on, Mike.
Camp on, Chris.
Until next time.
Peace.
Hey, they came down to top vanity, brought the proliferation of humanity. Ayy, fallen sons of the Most High God took advantage of the planet he made, forming a holy alliance of evil. And look at the daughters of Adam in vain. Then the flood rain came to restore its creational order to how we arranged. But the disembodied spirits of the giants still want a war, still want to kill in the core, to see the blood of the innocent spill on the floor. That's the demoniac and the kind of Yeshua combined to heal and restore his image bearers in his second chance when he coming back, cause he bringing a sword. This ain't a planned sermon, it's a welcome to Camp Hermon. Yeah, welcome to Camp Hermon. This ain't a planned sermon, it's a welcome to Camp Hermon. Yeah, welcome to Camp Hermon.